thank you for joining us for part 2 of our conversation. This time we'll be talking about where we're hoping to go from here and how our experiences in the fellowship have shaped that. If you have no idea who we are, please be sure to check out part 1 of the series. And today we are back with Julia, we're back with Bryn, we're back with Nick, and I am Ben. And to kick it off, we're going to start with our first little conversation topic of how have your experiences in the fellowship influenced your plans for your professional development trajectory? So to what extent does it motivate you to continue working in the environmental sector versus pivoting to something else?
Yeah, so for me, the fellowship truly underlines the fact that I want to continue to challenge unjust equilibriums and create social and environmental impact. It also showed me that there are a bunch of really cool people rethinking the way that we do business to forward sustainable development. Of course, I knew there was a strong connection between the two, but the fellowship really demonstrated so many more interactions than I had previously identified. And there's a real opportunity and a need to be creative and think differently to address the challenges we face in the 21st century. And I've been so impressed with these entrepreneurs that we work with. They've been so successful at addressing those, which is so inspiring to me. And as for the environmental sector, I'm not necessarily looking to work in sustainable agriculture right away, for instance, but I'm positive that I want to, in some way or another, be contributing to sustainable development. I've been very interested in impact investing for some time and impact measuring, in large part thanks to the experience of the fellowship.
That's so interesting, Bryn. And I think for me, I've sort of seen this transformation almost a little bit closer into the sphere where you sort of find yourself and where you're really interested. When we all applied for the fellowship, we were anticipating going into the field. I was really drawn to the fact that I was going to get to work with the farmers that were in the community that DIG was working with. And then I was going to get to see sustainable agriculture rooted in community being implemented. That was so exciting for me, and really where I really saw my professional path sort of leading me to. And what changed when the pandemic began and there was no longer an option for the international field component, we got to work a lot more with the executives of the enterprise and with the business side of the enterprise more than the field side and the farming side and the gardening side of the enterprise. And through that, as someone who had studied environmental science for the past 4 years and who really had had minimal exposure to business or economics or the intersection between the environment and business, to have this experience where we were working really closely with the executives and learning more about the business and the enterprise side of things, now I have this whole interest in exploring more in my sort of professional development trajectory where I can merge my passion for the environment, my passion for a more sustainable food system with now my interest and curiosities in business. So now when Bryn is talking about the circular economy or is talking about impact investing, I am so curious to hear more and learn more. And I think that I'm so grateful that this fellowship, although it wasn't able to, give us what the initial promise was because of the pandemic, it was able to, in some ways, provide me with so much more because it really allowed me to shift my focus and my area of interest and exposed me to something that no other experience or opportunity at Santa Clara has been able to. And so, the fact that I'm now considering some sort of work as a sustainability coordinator for a company is something that a couple months ago, I couldn't have told you I was going to be interested in. So it's really cool to sort of reflect and see that play out and be able to engage in conversations with people like Bryn who have similar interests.
That is so interesting to hear, Julia. It actually sounds like we had fairly similar realizations, I guess, post fellowship. And it's also interesting to hear how we've also talked about having this natural orientation for having some sort of professional career that's oriented towards helping others. And like you, I was super excited to go into the field. I love working hands-on and having that field work experience, but it was also interesting to start to learn the operational side of things. I didn't know all the resources and all the efforts that went into making a social enterprise run. like you see the impact, but you don't necessarily see all the little things that go into making that impact happen. And I was like a kid on Christmas, sitting in on all those interviews, just like, okay, you do this, okay, impact model, business model, you need investors, you need this. And all those little things just really sparked some sort of curiosity in me that's like, there's so much more to development than just, okay, this is what we need to do to get this person to this point. Like, there's the human component, but also there's the systems component. But yeah, I completely agree. It's been really interesting to get to see both sides of development, like the people and the systems.
So now, Ben, for you, where do you how has your kind of professional trajectory changed as a result of seeing that?
Yeah, so it's been a roller coaster ride. I've been all over the place in terms of, I guess, figuring out exactly what I want to do. And I guess through the fellowship experience, I also learned that it's important to cut yourself some slack and not, or and understand that you don't have to have your ideal job right away. Um, but I started the summer thinking that environmental law was the route for me because I was really interested in policy, and I felt that that was a great way to sort of be able to advocate and have some sort of impact. But the fellowship experience just reinforced the idea that I love being around people. I love having those close relationships. So now I'm looking at international development work, whether that's working for the UN or working for United States African Development Foundation, but sort of a role where, but there's also, like Ben was talking about, there's so many different options. Like you can do grant writing, you can do impact investing, but definitely some sort of role where I can do the behind the scenes, but also still get to interact with the people.
I mean, you guys, Ben wasn't, he's putting this lightly. Ben wasn't just, interested in environmental law. He was studying for the LSAT and took the LSAT. So the fact that, the vocational discernment activities that we did in class and the conversations that we had and the reflections on the fellowship and even this conversation have sort of really allowed us to reassess and think through what, professionally is interesting to us. Nick, I'm curious. I know we're all curious to hear from you too.
Yeah, no, I can definitely agree with Julia and Ben on that, and like what Ben was saying, like about the excitement about like really broadening and changing our interest based on the fellowship. I came at it, I guess, from a little different angle because I was just very interested in the hard sciences before. I thought I was going to go into research, and I just seemed like it just seemed like a natural progression for me to go to grad school and just focus on some ecological research. But GSBF really challenged that and kind of helped me to refocus like what I actually want to do and what I'm really excited about. And this both happened in like the action research, but also like the vocational discernment and the reflection that happened in the past fall was like super critical, and super important for how I like understand myself. And like, I feel like I just have a better understanding of like my place in the world now. And one thing that really came out of it for me was emphasizing like the social and the human aspect of ecology. I'd focused like mainly on the natural side, but really bringing that social aspect of it to light. Like they're pretty inseparable. So I guess for future project prospects, I'm kind of with Ben on like my options are seem kind of unlimited, which is kind of cool, a little bit daunting, but I guess I'm interested in the applied sciences right now where I can like use the hard skills that I've learned through my environmental science and biology, like schooling, but then also, I don't know, be able to produce something that just seems more useful and more impactful, like directly to people.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think it's so true that we were always challenged in the fellowship to think about all of the interactions that different systems have, like ecology and humans and the environment and, just systems in general. So it's been really cool to be able to explore all of those different sides and all of our curiosities. Yeah, so I'm curious to know what specific experiences in the fellowship have shaped your interests or plans to continue working in social entrepreneurship or to continue working for a social enterprise.
Yeah, I would say like for me, the single most impactful experience I had was when we started getting the transcripts back from the mental health interviews that we conducted, and just being able to, I guess, like see the information directly from the people and really listen to their stories and hear their stories, and then being able to turn around and create a trauma management curriculum, and really produce something that can be like beneficial to the people who helped inform it. And just seeing that direct impact was just so powerful. And kind of building off my previous answer, I'd just love to be able to incorporate this into my career in like applied sciences, hopefully, to be able to promote like localized community driven solutions. And again, I really don't know what form this would take or what sector exactly, but I would love to get back into the social enterprise space in some way.
Yeah, I completely agree, Nick, that there's definitely need to, I guess, take some time, reflect, and sort of really pin down exactly what it is you want to get out of a career. But there's definitely a lot of value in a career in social entrepreneurship or working for a social enterprise. And I don't think I exactly nailed down what the most impactful moment was for me until probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it's when Keith mentioned to me that if you only had a team full of dreamers, you'd be left with dreams. And for some reason, something in my head clicked, and it's like, that's so true. There's so much talk about wanting to be an innovator and thinking big picture, be a visionary. But there's less conversation about all the behind the scenes work that goes into making those visions a reality. So hearing that from Keith and then being able to think back through my time with PsychoConnect and see how PsychoConnect has this big mission of increasing income and bringing clients towards more sustainable livelihoods. And there's so many different components in place to help them reach those goals. And like you mentioned, Nick, actually seeing the impact that you can have through our deliverables on helping our enterprises meet those missions was extremely rewarding, just because it's nice to see that your work is valued, but also just in showing me that I can produce something that creates value. And that seems sort of, I guess, well, of course you can, but actually seeing that you can produce something that has a real world application and will affect so many people's lives, it's a powerful experience. And then just the process of being able to work with so many different people along the way and the collaboration sort of really made me start to think that if I don't necessarily work for a social enterprise directly, I feel social entrepreneurship or the idea of itself can be carried into so many different fields. You can take that idea of meeting people where they are and not losing the agency of the individual to any field. So I don't know exactly what field I'll end up in, but those ideas of social entrepreneurship will definitely be carried with me.
That's so great, Ben. And I think what's so special is we all feel really similarly. And I think something that I noticed both in the experience that Bryn and I had and in hearing Nick, your story, and Ben, your story, is that what is so special and what was so special about our experience was that we were able to be involved in many different steps along, the stage of project design to project implementation, that we were able to play a role in sort of each one of the steps and then really saw through the implementation and even the impact that that project had. And that's, I think, what is so special is the level of involvement in project creation and project execution. And I think that that's something also that in us looking for different jobs or employment opportunities, even if it's not working for a social enterprise, considering those things that we really value about our experience working with a social enterprise and looking for those opportunities in any future workplace, the opportunity to have your voice heard on a team, the opportunity to be a part of many different projects, the opportunity to see a project through and feel good and confident and rewarded by its impact. All of those things are really important. So like you said, Ben, even if we choose not to work for a social enterprise, we won't lose the sort of what we value about that type of work and what we're looking for. And I think that's what's really important moving forward.
And I guess for one last question to wrap up our conversation, what do you guys believe is the most powerful intervention point in addressing the current climate crisis? And how does this align or not with your vocational interests?
I think that the most powerful intervention point is within our food system. If we can establish a level of food sovereignty within our communities, then I think that strengthens communities from the ground up, and sort of we can move forward in combating the climate crisis from there. Not only does sustainable agricultural production and a more localized food system reduce, the negative implications for in advancing climate change, but also it's going to allow more people to be involved in the fight against climate change. If we can ensure that everyone in our community is well fed by produce that is affordable, accessible, nutritious, grown using really sustainable practices, then everyone is not only well fed, but is also sort of feels attached to the movement and the fight against climate change. And so I think that is a really important intervention point. And I think that Britt and I experienced that and learned so much more about that in our experience working with DIG. DIG is able to really transform the ways in which communities have access to nourishing food. And so if our food system can transition to something that's more localized, that is implementing more organic or agroecological practices, then we're feeding a community of people who can be involved in the fight against climate change, and we're also reducing the negative implications of food production on the environment. And so I think that it's almost, it can combat two problems at the same time, and I think that's what's so important about it.
Yeah, I completely agree, Julie. I think sort of starting at a more localized level with something that's so integral to everyone's lives, such as food, that's a great way to start combating our current climate crisis. I, along similar lines, think that the most important or most powerful point of intervention is around education. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important that the visibility of the climate crisis is increased. Climate change is one of those problems where you don't really see it. You only really see its effects. So the only way to really get people to understand its impacts is to bring it close to them. I know there's this big idea where all of developed countries, or not all, but a lot of the developed countries are responsible for producing a lot of our carbon emissions, a lot of our waste. But we often don't have to look at that or see it because we send it off to other places. So it's almost an out of sight, out of mind idea. And that allows for people to get a little complacent when it comes to the fight against the climate crisis. So I think that increasing that visibility through different educational programs and making genuine connections with people would be a powerful way to, I guess, continue to build up and, I guess, fuel the fire in this fight against the climate crisis. Through the fellowship, one thing that I learned is the importance of telling a story. Oftentimes storytelling isn't something that's looked at as being very academic, but there is an art and there's a skill involved in being able to tell a story that can connect with people. You need something compelling that's going to make people want to hear more. And I feel that's something that's currently lacking in the environmental movement. There's a lot of science, there's a lot of hard data, but there's not a lot of stories. There's not a lot of faces behind the lives that are being lost. There's not a lot of faces behind the different species that are going extinct. So I think it's really important that as environmentalists and just as people in general, we get better at telling these stories and really connecting the effects of climate change back to the lives that are being affected by it.
Yeah, I completely agree with what both of you are saying. And I think that what's at the core of both of those points is that it's important to bring everyone into the conversation of addressing the climate crisis. All communities need to be part of the conversation. We will all feel the effects of climate change, some places far more than others. We'll also feel how countries go about sustainable development. We'll feel the effects of that. And it's vital that to successfully address climate change, the global community needs to be a part of solving it. And like we mentioned in last episode, and I think it's definitely worth repeating, interventions will not be successful if they just don't fit with a specific community. Oftentimes community members and leaders know what's best for their community, not someone thousands of miles away. So let's bring them to the table. In addition, all sectors need to be involved in the conversation. It's not just going to be about addressing, energy or food systems or waste, although each of these will be incredibly important sectors to focus on. It's also not just about scientists or academics who are working on this. It's a major issue, and with large corporations and investors can and should be part of this conversation as well. There's also a lot of impact to be made in these spaces because they haven't necessarily made enough space for sustainable development yet. And I think this connects well to my vocational interests of potentially working in a field of impact investing. And really all of this has been what the fellowship is about. All 16 of us fellows come from such different backgrounds with different skill sets, and it's been really great to see what we can all accomplish and the solutions that we can come up with together. It's also about action research, directly working with people in the field, as we saw, and we're able to, be consultants and have our recommendations be based in large part from what we learn from the beneficiaries and communities that we work with. It's really just important to focus on the fact that every intervention needs to be based in both collaboration and inclusivity.
Thanks, Bryn. And what I found to be so interesting in what you said and what Ben said as well is understanding the intervention points that can not only happen in other countries, but that can happen in the United States, in the developed world as well. And so we, the three of us, had the experience of working with enterprises that were contributing to environmental sustainability in some way in another country. And what's so important is that we recognize the place for those interventions in our own communities, in our own backyards. And so now moving forward, professionally and vocationally, what we're interested in, how can we really incorporate that? I mean, we've studied environmental science for the past 4 years, environmental studies or sciences, and we feel such a connection to climate change and the climate crisis. And so how can our work, Bryn, you mentioned so many different sectors, you mentioned so many different options and so many different stakeholders, and how can we incorporate ourselves into that so that we don't lose sight of something that is so important to us, regardless of what, profession or employment opportunity we choose to take on. And so I really appreciate you both saying that in a fellowship that is sort of rooted in this international component, recognizing that, understanding the importance of sustainable development and the climate crisis and its effect on developing countries, but also its effect and the potential interventions that can happen in developed countries. And that was so interesting to sort of think about.
Yeah, that's so important, such an important part. And not only in our professional lives moving forward, but learning about how to integrate these things in our day-to-day lives. Of course, we're not perfect environmentalists, so I think there's still a lot to learn. And I learned a lot through the fellowship itself, especially our work with DIG. I know it was really cool to be working with farmers and beneficiaries, and then for Julia and I to work on the garden in our backyard or go to the farmers market together and have that idea that it's so important to have, local food systems, and using all the different parts of the plant was something that we really focused on a lot in our conversations with beneficiaries.
Right. To recognize the value of small, local intervention. Just these small things that you can do in your life or in your relationship. I mean, Bryn totally inspired me and showed me all these different vegan recipes. And now when I think about cooking a meal, I'm not really thinking about any of the meat products that I could use. And Ben, you as well. I mean, you both have played such an important role in my sort of food journey and what's important to me. And just those small interventions have a big impact, because now it's something that I'm interested in, and maybe I can have the same effect on someone else. And so it's really sort of spreading at that point from the ground up. And those movements, those interventions that are happening and building from the ground up, can be really powerful as well, especially when accompanied by like top-down movements and policies and interventions as well.
Absolutely, Julia. Well, we've had so much fun talking about all of the different ways the fellowship has impacted our lives, both personally and professionally. So thank you so much for tuning in to listen. Check out part 1 if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.